Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy back again with another live AMA where I answer your automotive questions and some other questions as well. Today is March 1st, and this is the 83rd installment of what I've done. So before we get started, why don't I just go over a little bit about my live shows in case you're not familiar with them. First of all, I'm taking the questions from a forum thread on my website. There's a link to that in the description of this video that you can go to and post your questions to. I'll answer as many as I possibly can during the course of this program, which usually lasts about an hour. Additionally, if you are watching this on YouTube, if you're posting your questions down in the comments of the YouTube video, it's not likely that I'll be answering those because, once again, I'll be taking them from the forum thread. However, EricTheCarGuy.com is your answer if you find yourself in need of automotive information. In fact, I recommend that you go for the FAQ page first, or the FAQ troubleshooting is how it's listed. I've written several articles that actually cover the majority of the questions that I get asked, that include articles, videos, all kinds of things, engine overheats, electrical problems, brake problems, all that kind of stuff. So if I don't get to your question today, EricTheCarGuy.com is the place to go. And if you don't find the answer in the FAQ, you can also sign up for the website and post your question to the forum, and we'll do our best to help you there. Anyhow, I think we've got that out of the way. Oh, yes. And also, I have a bad habit of sometimes butchering your names, and I apologize for that in advance. Anyway, why don't we get on to those questions I talked about? And those questions would start with Menace, see, I'm starting already. Menace, Isle, whatever. Hey Eric, your videos and website help a lot in understanding and doing the procedures for auto repairs. Thank you for that. My question is about a heater core. During the summer when the heater is not being used, is the coolant in the heater core stuck in the heater core for months until I turn my heat back on in winter? Does that stuck coolant make the heater core go bad? And if it does, should I turn the heat on at certain times during the summer to flush out that stuck coolant? Thank you. You know, that's actually a really great question. And to answer it, I'm going to explain a little bit about how your HVAC system works. Your heater core is basically like a baby radiator inside of your dash. And it seems sort of counterintuitive to say that that's responsible for the heat inside your vehicle, but it is. So it takes the coolant from the engine while it's running, circulates it through that heater core, and then there's a fan that blows past it and removes that heat from the heater core and transfers it into the passenger compartment. So there's that part of it. Now, additionally, many cars have air conditioning, which has an evaporator core, which is also inside of your dash, very close to that heater core, in fact. And that's what's responsible for keeping the cabin cool. I'm not going to get into how AC works exactly right now, but it uses the same fan and the same ductwork inside your dashboard as the heat does. There's a little door that goes between those two things that basically controls the airflow through the heater core or through the evaporator, depending upon if you want hot or warm air going into the passenger compartment. Addition to that, there is often, especially on modern vehicles, what is called a heater control valve, which is a usually cable controlled, sometimes electronically controlled valve that's in the piping that goes to the heater core. So in other words, the coolant passes through this valve and then into the heater core and then through the heater core and out the other side. Whenever you're commanding AC, what happens is you want cold air. You don't really want that warm coolant circulating through the heater core. So that heater control valve shuts off the flow of coolant through the heater core to prevent coolant from flowing through the heater core so that you get cool air, so you don't get that warm air and then the cool air going through your HVAC system. Now, on older systems that don't have the heater control valve, coolant is constantly flowing through the heater core. So whether you've got the vents on, whether you've got it set to cool, it doesn't matter. There's always going to be coolant flowing through that heater core with the absence of a heater control valve. With the heater control valve, it does stop flow through the through the heater core. I'm getting confused now. So it doesn't necessarily get stuck in there, and there's always some kind of flow. So in other words, there really isn't a situation where you don't have coolant flowing through the heater core or to the heater core. So it's not like it stagnates inside of there. So in other words, There really is nothing that you need to do as far as during the summertime, running your heat from time to time. That doesn't really have an effect. It's going to flow through, like I said, unless that heater control valve is closed off, which actually it limits the flow more than anything. I don't think it stems it completely because there's still the other side of the system, or the other hose that's going into there that doesn't necessarily have a valve on it. But point being is only when it's commanded to where you want really cold air into the passenger compartment does it completely shut it off. And even then there's still some kind of flow. So don't worry about it. But once again, an excellent question that led up to a little bit about how HVAC systems work. So really like your question a lot. That was way cool. I think a lot of people can benefit from that. Bon Nall. I think I got that. Hey, Eric. I'm 18 years old and I love your videos. This is the second question I've had and was so excited to have you answer my first question on my 88 Dodge D150. Well, anyways, my question is about schooling. I'm, fingers crossed, graduating high school this year and I'm looking to get into the University of Northwestern Ohio. I thought that was where you had dark matter Pikachu dynoed, but I wasn't 100%. So if it was, then could you maybe tell me a bit about what you thought of it and maybe something you think is worth mentioning about your own automotive school that could maybe be useful going in for people like us, such as is it a lot of studying or things like that. Also, I'm going to attach a pic of my truck just for fun, hoping you like it. Yes, it's an awesome truck you have there, and it is an 88 Dodge truck, just a truck, an honest truck with a big ram on the hood. I love it. All right, so to answer your question, yes, Dark Matter Pikachu did get dynoed at the University of Northwestern Ohio. My impressions of the place were it was an excellent facility. Also, Kevin Frishy, Justin's his son, Kevin Frishy, who owns a machine shop that built Dark Matter Pikachu and also helped out with that dyno run, was an instructor there for many, many years. And I consider him to be one of the most knowledgeable people as far as engines is concerned. I also like the fact that he doesn't go around saying he knows everything. He's always learning. And I think that's an important thing for anybody getting into this field, but in particular for somebody that's an instructor like myself. I try to constantly learn new things and I just enjoy that. I enjoy picking up new skills and learning stuff. So I think that's a big part of doing this, or basically anything. So if you have an interest in automotive, you know, the more that you learn, the better, and you'll never stop learning. And that's a good thing, because if not, you get bored, you get stagnant. Nah, not so fun. But overall, I thought UNOH was an excellent facility. And as far as the instructors, there was Nate Mailhot, who also who is currently an instructor at UNOH, who was helping out with that dyno run, who I also thought was a very knowledgeable and very cool guy. I also met the director of the school, who, once again, was a really nice guy. So all the people that I met there, I can't say I've attended classes, but every indication shows that it's an excellent school. So it's especially if you're considering getting into the performance side of things, I think it's a great place. I know they have dyno cells both for engines and chassis dynos that maybe just dyno. I don't know how many chassis dynos they have. I haven't seen it. In fact, once I finish the Fairmont project over there, or Oliver as I sometimes call it, I'm hoping to take it back there and see what it does on the chassis dyno. That being said, as far as my schooling, I went to Rosedale Technical Institute in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Love the school. Scanner Danner is still an instructor there. He and I were only a couple years apart. We both went there. And the school has done nothing but get better since I left. That didn't come out quite right, but point is I mean, they were at an older facility. They moved to a newer facility. They've since upgraded. They've got a great diesel program going on right now. You can even get your CDL through them, which was something that wasn't possible when I went to school there. And they're a non-for-profit school, so it's, you know, all the money goes back into the program, and I know the president, and he is very dedicated to automotive education and helping people in the community and everything. And he's, you know, if you had the opportunity to go to Rosedale and you're around that area, go there. You won't be disappointed. You really won't. And in fact, I've been there recently, and the school has, like I said, done nothing but get better. So that's awesome. So that's as far as my experience. Now, for other people who might be considering a career in automotive education, now the automotive field right now, in my opinion, is a little weird. And at least for me in Cincinnati, there was a certain cap, and this may be this way just in general as far as auto repair. There seemed to be, you know, you'd work for a while and you'd just reach a certain salary level, and that was it. You weren't going to go any farther than that. And that may be true at a lot of places, and there's only so much that they're going to pay technicians, and you're not going to make a killing at it. But it sure is nice to be able to pay off those tools that you have to buy. That being said, I've been recommending a lot people look into diesel. And the reason being is, think about everything in your life. It was on the back of a truck or a boat at some point. And both of those things ran on diesel. Not to mention the construction equipment used to build your house, your schools, all that stuff. So diesel, as far as the commercial side of things, is massive. And despite what's happened with Volkswagen recently, I think the commercial diesel market is not going away. In fact, it's probably doing nothing but developing. So in other words, a lot of opportunities in diesel, a lot of jobs in diesel. Thing about it is you might have to work second or third shift to start, which kind of sucks, but the money's better. And it's not like the automotive world where you've got regular everyday customers who are probably, who could be struggling financially to get by, and you hit them with, $1,000, $2,000 repair that they've got to do, then that's a difficult situation. Whereas in a commercial environment, if there's something down about a vehicle, that's costing them money. There's no question that you're going to do the repair kind of thing. So it's a completely different thing. And as I said, you may do better in diesel and you may have more opportunities in diesel, but the hours may not be as good. So there's that. Analog, I can read that, and cool avatar, dude. It's kind of scaring me. He has an intermittent problem with his BMW E46 328i, EU spec 12 2000 5-speed manual, 120,000 miles. Long story short, it is difficult to put the car in gear, especially reversed. First and second after cold starts in the winter. After cold starts during the summer, when it is generally hotter outside, there is no problem at all. Basically, whenever the temperatures are below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, it's a nightmare to get into gear, lever to go into the desired position. It requires so much force that I feel like I'm going to actually break something. What I've been doing is either leave the car running for like 10 minutes and then drive, since the problem is not as pronounced, or shift in fourth or fifth first, and then only without taking my foot off the clutch, put it into first. Both of these tricks do the job. It should be pointed out that this problem goes away entirely when the engine reaches operating temperature, which usually happens after 20 minutes of driving. Initially, I thought it was old transmission fluid, therefore I got it changed, as well as the oil in the diff with the appropriate ones at the BMW dealership, and still the problem persists. While there, I asked the mechanics about this, and they said it was probably normal and there isn't anything obviously wrong with the car. Still, somehow I doubt that, as when I got the car 6 years ago, something like this was never a problem. The thing has been happening and has become worse since the past winter. I also performed your clutch slipping test, and the clutch seems fine. There are no check engine lights and no strange noises coming from the transmission either. That is a sort of a head scratcher, because the whole time I'm reading it, the first thing I'm thinking is the fluid. Because, it warms up, it starts to lubricate and work a lot better. So my first thought was the fluid. Then you said you changed it. And not only did you change it, but you had the BMW, or at least you used BMW fluids. So everything should be on the up and up as far as the fluid is concerned, based on what you're writing here. So that leaves me thinking, okay, what can cause the transmission to not shift when cold, but then shift when warm? And I still keep going back to fluid, because if you had a mechanical problem, I would suspect that it would be something that would happen all the time. As far as reverse goes, reverse is usually on the same shift lever or shift linkage as, say, your reverse. So your fifth gear and like that isn't a problem. So in other words, I'm thinking like maybe a shift rail or something like that that's sticking. But that's what I'm going back to, is that there's something binding inside the transmission. Now maybe at some point something got bent or warped. It just seems like maybe there's something that's warped when it's cold and then frees up when it gets warm. Maybe there's expansion in the case or something that allows something to move. But basically I'm left with something internal inside the transmission. It could possibly be shift linkage, but that doesn't seem to play as well as something internal within the transmission, because if it's external, I would think that number one, the BMW guys would have looked for it, found it. But number two, that it would be something that might happen all the time. like grinding into a certain gear no matter what the temperature is. So, once again, I'm going to something possibly internal, but you know what you might try? And I don't know, I wish I knew what type of fluid BMWs use, but something that I do with Hondas, and I'm very adamant about only using Honda manual transmission fluid in Honda transmissions, with the exception of General Motors synchro mesh transmission fluid. That stuff is like magic fluid. It really is. It's one of the things that GM nailed. And I have fixed difficult shifting problems with GM synchro mesh transmission fluid. And I can't really explain it other than whatever friction modifiers or whatever they're putting in there. Like I say, it's got to be some kind of magic fluid. So what you might try before you condemn the transmission, or you condemn the transmission to be rebuilt. Manual transmissions are not like automatic transmissions, so they're not as, complicated, let's say, to get rebuilt. So that's something that's entirely possible. But what I'm saying is before you go there, you might try the synchro mesh transmission fluid. And don't expect it to work overnight. You have to let it work in for a little bit. Usually, by the end of the week, you should notice some kind of difference, or just at least a couple of days. But it's amazing what that stuff has done. So, and even in the position that you're in, you're already having difficulties. So if you're faced with the prospect of something going wrong with the transmission, then the synchro mesh fluid may or may not harm it. I can't say that it will or it won't. Really can't. Not a German car expert, especially with BMWs. I can only speculate here. But like I say, I have seen great results. GM synchro mesh transmission fluid. It's good stuff. UK R Stig 89. I sort of got that. 2007 Civic Si. Last summer, I had to replace the driver's side rear caliper. Now my e-brake on that side does not engage at the same time as the e-brake on the right side. Is there a way to adjust the left side e-brake cable so that both sides go on at the same time? In addition, sometimes when I use the e-brake, it does not want to disengage right away. Car from Northeast, so rust can play a part. This is actually a common problem on those vehicles, just because of how the cabling and the rust is set up. Let's put it this way. Rear calipers, particularly on Hondas, and also I've seen similar problems on Toyotas and some other ones as well, need to be periodically serviced. So in other words, you need to remove the caliper, remove the brake pads, clean the brake pads, and sometimes I actually have to grind the rust off the brake pads. It's the easiest way to do it. I mean, the real problem is also happening in the bracket that the brake pads sit in on the caliper itself. What I used to do when I was at the dealership and we had a sandblaster is I used to pop those off, put them in the sandblaster, sandblast them down, and underneath those metal shims that are stuck to the caliper itself. So I'd remove those metal shims, sandblast the caliper, put them back on. What happens is that rust builds up and decreases the clearance and sort of wedges the pads into place and they don't move. And that's why you have to periodically go in there and address that. And like I said, I just took a shortcut and started filing down the pads to make up for that space that was being taken up by the rust. So first of all, you have to make sure that your brake pads are moving freely. Next, there isn't an adjustment per side for the brakes themselves. But once you're certain that both brake calipers are working correctly and both brake cables are working correctly, because the brake cables themselves can go bad and rust up on the inside and start to stick. And a good way to check for this is disconnect them from the calipers themselves, activate the parking brake a few times, watch the actuation of the cable to see if it's moving properly. If it is, then you know it's not the cables. But what happens is maybe one side gets hung up. There's a central cable that runs over the exhaust, and then it attaches to a point to both of the other cables to go to each of the rear wheels. And what'll happen is, like if only one is working, when you pull on the cable, only one side of it will pull up. So it's like a T. So the cable gets pulled and one stays stuck and the other doesn't move. But if the cables are moving and everything in the calipers is moving correctly, it should move straight. There's an adjustment for the central cable underneath the console in the back. The brake that you pull up underneath in the console. It's sort of difficult to get to, but you do not want to do this until you're absolutely certain that the calipers and the cables are working correctly. And that's really only to take up the slack. It should take, I think, 7 to 13 clicks by the time it's engaged. So you pull up, count however many clicks. If it's more than 13, you might have a little slack in it. Sometimes I just pull up on the lever. If it's got a lot of slop in it before it starts to do anything, you can take up a little bit of that slop with that adjustment on that cable, but that's it. Don't try to make the adjustment at the cable first. Always start at the wheels and work your way back. That's just really just general practice with any parking brake cable, especially with drum brakes. You want to do the same thing. You want to make sure that your rear brakes are adjusted correctly first before you start messing with cables and everything else, because you can have a mismatch in adjustment between one side or the other, and you can cause similar problems to what you're describing. So service the calipers. I've got videos on this. I'll try and post links to that in the description, should I remember, and then work your way back up. So check the calipers, check the cables, then check the adjustment. New Angel Chili's, New Age Chili's. Okay. Has a 2005 Honda S2000, 55,000 miles, immaculate condition, garage kept whole, but after startup it shifts from first to second. Has not a grind but a notch feeling, and doesn't change due to high or low RPM shifting once the car is warm and operating temp. Everything is smooth, both highway and street. The only way to prevent the feeling is to shift from first to neutral, wait for a brief second and go into second. Any clues? TSB, model behavior you might be aware of. Stay dirty. Channel is great. I normally don't see, and thank you for that, by the way, I normally don't see issues with first, second so much as third gear on Honda transmissions. The synchros tend to have problems. You may have a similar situation to the BMW owner earlier, and what you might try is the synchro mesh transmission fluid and see if that helps. That could help that notchy feeling. And Honda transmissions are what I've had experience with synchro mesh transmission fluid, and it's been positive every time I've tried it. I tried it on my own car first before I did it with any customer cars or anything. I had a car that had some difficulty going into third sometimes. I put synchro mesh in it and that went away, and it never came back. So it is magic fluid, so you might want to give that a try, but it does sound possibly a fluid issue. If you haven't changed the fluid in a long time, Honda fluid is what you want to use. But if you're having a shifting problem, consider trying the synchro mesh stuff. I haven't seen it cause a problem, but I have seen it fix some things, so perhaps that can help you. Steve 1990, I can do that. The name, that is. Has a 2008 Ford Explorer. I was driving home from work the other night and went to use the rear windshield washer and noticed the wiper motor moving very slowly. Made it about a quarter of the way up to the window and then just stopped and wouldn't move anymore. I'm unable to get it to move when I go back there to assist it. Originally I thought the wiper motor might be, I thought wiper motor, but given that it tries to move and will move the rest of the way when I help it, it makes me not so sure. Oliver is waiting there. Thanks for your help. Okay, it could be the motor, or it could be that there's increased resistance in the electrical circuit someplace. Maybe at a connector or something of that nature. Basically, I should do a video on this. It's like long overdue. It's voltage drop. So in a simple circuit, you've got the load, which in your case with a windshield wiper motor, we'll just say just the windshield wiper motor. The windshield wiper motor is the load in the system. And you need a load in an electrical circuit, because if not, think of just taking a wrench and dropping it across the battery post. What's going to happen? Well, it's going to probably make a lot of sparks and weld itself to the top of those battery posts, because those amps can run unchecked. They need something to do, or it's a short circuit. So they have a load, and there's usually a control, which is a switch, and then you have your connectors and sometimes relays and things like that. But we're just going to keep it simple. So in other words, that wiper motor is a load. So you've got 12 volts or whatever battery voltage is going into it, but then by the time it goes through the load and comes out the other side, there's virtually no electricity left. There's just enough to overcome the resistance and everything to get back to the ground side of the battery. And that's the way it works. So in other words, electricity goes rushing into the load and then goes through the load, and then it just gets completely flattened out. And on the other side of that, there's very little. So you can find these problems with short circuits or bad connectors or things like that simply by doing a voltage drop. In other words, checking the voltage before and after the connector. And if before the connector it's 12 volts, after the connector it's like 11.5, you're like, oh, hey, what are you doing there, Mr. Connector? You're stealing my electricity, you're stealing my electrons. Not cool, bro. So clean up the connector, put it back together, everything's good. However, sometimes the motors themselves go bad and cause increased resistance. Or there's something internally that goes wrong inside of it and it's not able to utilize the mechanical motion that the electricity is trying to provide. So in other words, it still could be that motor, but you could do a voltage drop on the one side of the circuit, going in and coming out and seeing what you got on the other side. So I suspect it's the motor. It's usually the most common thing, but because it's rear wiper, you might want to check the connectors. You might want to check those things to see if it's getting the proper voltage to it. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll just isolate it. I've got like a power probe, and I can supply power and ground whenever I want. So especially on a 12-volt circuit, like a motor like that. I mean, you don't do this on computer-controlled circuits, but yeah, things like light bulbs, things like motors, you can very easily activate on their own, isolate them from the circuit, disconnect the connector completely, put power where power is supposed to go, put ground where ground is supposed to go, and it should operate. If it's having a difficult time operating when you're directly supplying power and ground, you can be reasonably certain that that's the problem, that the motor itself is the problem. So good luck with that. There's also an electrical FAQ that's on the website that might be of interest to you as well. MST3K, another one I can read. It's always a win when I can read the name correctly. Wanted to get your opinion on piston slap. In my case, it presents a knocking noise that only occurs in winter months when the engine is cold. It goes away when the engine warms up. I have no performance issues at all. This is a 2004 Subaru Forester with 103,000 miles. Another previous owner, and this car has had good oil change history since new. This has been a great car, and I intend to keep it. The only things I needed in the coming year will be new struts, new tires, and before I start spending money, I wanted to get your opinion. I do not mind this noise, but want to know if you feel that this sort of thing is a harmless noise or consistent with age and not more serious and to a detrimental condition. Are there any tests you could think of doing if you were checking this car out yourself? Well, first of all, it is impossible for me to say whether a noise is severe or something to worry about if I'm not hearing it. So I really can't say one way or the other what is actually occurring or where the noise is actually coming from, but you say it happens on cold startups. As far as it's the pistons, I have no idea. But the first thing that comes to my mind is make sure you're using the correct oil with the correct viscosity in there. Because if you're using an oil that is thicker than what's called for, it will take longer to reach those vital components of the engine on initial startup, and therefore the engine will be noisy until the oil starts to circulate and warm up. So therefore, you have to take that into consideration. So in other words, make sure you're using the right oil for starters. Outside of that, and I've often heard of people who have such engine noises and have decided to put thicker weight oil in order to try to alleviate that noise. Well, in my opinion, you're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul in that situation, to where, yes, you may be quieting the noise, but you may be creating more engine wear, especially on startup, because it takes longer for that oil to reach the top end of the engine, mostly is what happens. So that could be a possibility, but noises inside the engine are worn out parts. No matter how you look at it, piston slap or otherwise. I don't know specifically on your model if there's some sort of TSB or something with that. I think I recall something with Subarus, but I'm not saying I have that knowledge on hand. But if that is the case, then you got to address a mechanical problem. Whether or not it's severe, bad enough to cause issues, I cannot say without hearing it for myself or taking a look at it. Or even, if it's piston slap, if it's wrist pin that's bad or bearings that are bad, there's more than just the pistons smacking around inside the cylinders that it could be. And it's honestly going to be impossible to tell exactly what it is unless you tear the engine down. So it's really difficult to say, is all I can give you. And I guess the best advice is make sure you're using the correct oil and go from there. But before you invest in, tires and suspension is a pretty significant investment. So before you make that investment, I would have it checked out and have it checked out by more than one person, and just see if you can get a couple of opinions on what it might be. Try the internet. There may be something out there as well. I didn't have time to look up your particular problem on your vehicle, but it could be something. The Avenger. Yes, I'm getting better with this name thing. My friend has a 1999 Chevy K2500 Suburban 7.4 that had Dex Cool, and the coolant turned to goop in the cooling system. This is not uncommon. He ran cleaner through the system and switched to green coolant, but now the truck overheats when sitting still. I'm not sure if it did this before the switch. The truck also just got a new water pump just before the switch. Apparently you're supposed to replace that clutch thing for the mechanical fan with it, which he did not. I can't find any obvious obstruction in front of the radiator, but when I looked at the radiator, when we were doing the water pump, it looked like mud was in it. My dad said my sister's 98 Pontiac Grand Prix needed a radiator after its Dexcool goop incident, but I don't want to tell my friend it's a radiator without being sure of it. How do you go about this problem? It doesn't lose coolant, it just overheats when not moving. You might want to flush it again, and you might want to consider just flushing the radiator out. In other words, taking the upper and lower radiator hoses off and just running the water straight through it until that muddy gunk goes away. And that muddy gunk often happens when you combine Dexcool with green coolant, and that's almost impossible to get all the Dexcool out. So there's going to be some left in it, so it will create some muddy yuck. But you might want to make sure that there isn't any obstructions or any goop inside the radiator, as your dad suggested there might be. The other thing is, whenever you're doing cooling system service, it is extremely important to purge the air from the cooling system, because if there's air in the system, that air doesn't allow proper coolant flow, and as a result, it can cause overheats like you're talking about. But the minute you take off, there's enough pressure within the system or volume of coolant moving in the system to move that air around, and therefore it starts to cool again efficiently. So it could just as easily be air in the system. You might want to check for that first before you look elsewhere, before you start flushing out radiators and things. As far as the way radiators work, the bottom hose should be cool, or relatively cool, because that's the cold water coming out of the radiator after it's been cooled. The top hose is the hot water coming out of the engine. And when the radiator is working efficiently, obviously the top will be hotter than the bottom. Is kind of how it's supposed to exchange the heat before it goes back into the engine. So, in other words, I've actually had people say to me, my upper hose is hot, my bottom hose is cool. What's going on? Why is my cooling system not working right? No, that's actually normal operation. So if a radiator is working correctly, that's what you should notice. So if you don't really notice any flow, or you don't really notice a temperature difference between the two hoses, it could possibly mean that there's a problem inside the radiator itself. Now that I'm thinking about it though, you might want to get one of these, and these are inexpensive at Harbor Freight. I'm still here, just walked over to the toolbox. This guy here, it's just a laser temperature thing that you can point at stuff and you can take the temperature. So you could find like a hot or a cold spot in a radiator with something like this. Is kind of what I'm getting at. The condensers for the AC is usually right in front of the radiator, but if you can, get in there with one of these and it could help give you a few clues as to what's going on. Also, that fan clutch that you talked about, that is supposed to engage when it gets hot. And if it doesn't engage when it gets hot, it won't pull coolant through the radiator, or won't pull air through the radiator, and therefore it won't cool as efficiently, especially at idle. So it may very well be just that thermostatic part of the fan was not replaced, and that could be the cause of the problem. So that's a possibility also. And there's also an overheat article on the website that covers some other things that might be beneficial to you. Let's see, Bust a Pepper. I'm getting better at these names. I'm getting cocky. I really shouldn't, right? Good day, Eric. 2 questions. First, will you ever do a daily vlog type video such as other YouTubers and vlog channels? I think if you did it, it would be super awesome. See now and watch the magnificent Eric the Car Guy goes to Walmart to pick up milk and eggs. Not gonna lie to you, I would watch it. Okay, second question. Have you ever had a close call in a shop, like a near miss? And if so, would you like to share your near miss story with us? If not, that's okay too. Have a great day, and I always look forward to new content from you. Yours truly, Colin. Thank you. Okay, first question as far as daily vlogs, not likely. I mean, I do a lot of different things during the day, and just producing the videos and stuff. There's so much social media now that it's overwhelming to me. And I try to keep up with it, and I try to stay as connected with the fans as I can, but there's also work that has to get done. So I do enjoy the interactions with fans, but at the same time, they wouldn't have the videos or any of this other stuff, the website, any of that stuff, without just constant attention that they require. So not likely on that. As far as, and aside from that, I'm not so much into talking about me. I'd rather talk about the repairs and the cars and the stuff like that. I'd rather, that seems more interesting to me than me. Anyway, Close call in the shop, yes. In fact, I did a video about this on ETCG1 called Mechanic Fails. And I talked about a couple of stories, but I'll just do one real quick here. I was doing head gaskets on a 1990-something Acura Legend. So it was a 3.5 liter engine, and it had common with head gasket issues. Anyway, I pulled one of the cylinder heads off, and I was cleaning off the cylinder block itself. And one of the things that I like to do when cleaning that surface is I like to pull the dowel pins out. The dowel pins are like the metal guides that the cylinder head sits on while you run the bolts in to help locate the cylinder head where it's supposed to be. Well, I was having a lot of difficulty getting one of these out, and I'd already done some cleaning of the engine and the rest of the area around the outside of it, and I'd sprayed it with some brake clean. Well, I went to use heat to try and remove that dowel pin, aluminum. It was just shot in the dark, complete shot in the dark, whether or not it was actually going to work. But the second I put the heat on it, basically, and I'd only taken the one cylinder head off, so the other cylinder head was still on. Basically what happened was instant combustion. I blew the valve cover off the opposite side of the engine. Well, I blew a big hole in it. So it exploded out to one side, and then fire came shooting out the other side of the engine, and I lost my eyebrows for a couple of months. So that was one of the things that I'm never going to do again. All right, we've burned up a half an hour just on the first page. Holy cow. And I'm sure there's many, many more questions now. Yeah, there's another page of them. Wacko308. I love the Oliver vids so far. Keep them coming. My question is, I have a 1990 Chevy C2500 with a 5.7 liter TBI V8. When I go to start it, after it's been running and up to operating temp, it likes to start then immediately die. Yet when it's cold, it will start without fail. I've done a couple of things, a complete tune-up on it, cap, rotor, plugs, and it still does it. What could be the cause? That's a 1990, so it's very early. It's pre-OBD2, and those vehicles weren't very good at detecting faults with sensors. And one of those sensors in particular that I'm thinking of here is a coolant temperature sensor, and it's basically designed to do exactly what it says, but it does this by varying its resistance based on temperature. What can happen is the sensor can still function and still change resistance, but may not work within the proper range and be giving the computer false information when you go to start the vehicle, either when it's warm or when it's cold. It could be fine, but when it's warm, it could give you that start-stall condition. And I normally never do this, but I'm going to say they're not that expensive. Try a coolant temperature sensor and see if the problem goes away. And I know I never do that, but I've seen it enough on the older OBD ones to where, like I say, they're still giving out a signal, it's just not a correct signal, and therefore they don't set a check engine light. But the newer systems are much more acute, and they have look at other things, like for instance, there's an air temperature sensor normally that goes with the battery of sensors that you have. So it looks at the air temperature sensor, it looks at the coolant temperature sensor, especially before you start it, and they should be reading about the same. And if they don't, the computer sort of picks that up and says, hey, one of you kids ain't right, and sets a code. But on the older ones, they don't do that, so. All right, timing light. Wow, I'm getting good at this. My dad's 96 Honda Accord 4-cylinder was recently welded on. The alternator seized, and I replaced it with a reman from reputable auto parts store, and it started smoking. Checked the battery voltage while it was running, 14.4 volts. Is the problem with my new alternator or the ECM, as it might have been damaged? Have you seen this before? Somewhat confused on what you're asking, because you say it was recently welded on. Now, welding on a car shouldn't cause a problem, especially if you disconnect the negative battery cable. And I don't know if that's a typo or something of that nature, because if it was welded on and the battery cable wasn't disconnected, something could have gotten fried in the process of that welding, because you didn't disable the electrical system. So it's quite possible something did happen with that, but honestly, without looking at this, I can't really say. And as far as where the smoke is coming from, the battery voltage isn't horrible. It's still below 15 volts, but it's hard to suspect the new alternator that is the problem. And as far as the ECM, there's actually something in Honda's called an ELD, electric load detection, that also helps control the field inside the alternator, so it's not just the computer. The computer actually doesn't do too much in that sense. It usually leaves it to the electric load detector. So I don't know, man. I really don't. I'm a little confused by your question, a little confused about how to answer it, and I apologize for that. Speeding Cheetah. Hey, Eric, how things go? Hope things are going well for you. Having fun with the Fairmont, I hope. Yes, I am. I've been working on it all day today, all day yesterday. I will be all day tomorrow. I want this car done. I want it to run. I'm over it, all right? I've been working on it actually a year now. And I just, it's, you know, after putting in the amount of effort that I put into it, and you've only seen some of the videos, after putting the effort that I put into it, it owes me something. It owes me at least, you know, a ride up and down the street, at the very least. Anyway, I digress. I've kind of gotten off topic. Let's get to your problems, not mine. Yesterday morning before leaving work, when I started up my 07 Dodge Caliber, it suddenly revved up to its max 4,000 RPM and stayed there. It took me several seconds to realize something was wrong, and I shut off the engine, only to realize that the WeatherTech molded mat I just reinstalled after cleaning them was mashing the gas pedal to the floor. Oh! Hope I did that part right. My question, does such a high rev for several seconds at a cold 20 degrees Fahrenheit startup could have damaged anything? You know what? Even if it did, it's done now. and I can't say that it's, you know, it's been hugely damaging to it. I mean, it's not the best thing for it, but once again, there's really nothing you can do. But that is an unfortunate situation. But I have run into a lot of performance problems that were corrected by simply moving floor mats. Just saying. What you're talking about is one thing I've seen, but the other thing I've seen is the floor mat gets under, or it just gets all bunched up under the gas pedal. And therefore, when they push the gas pedal down, it's not going all the way to the floor, and then it's not going as fast. And then they're like, my car doesn't perform as good. Well, take the floor mat out from under your gas pedal so you can push it all the way to the floor. Serious, no lie. It's more than once. Anyway. All right, Caratini, you know what? That is a really long question. I'm actually going to skip it. There's a lot of questions. It'd probably take me like 20 minutes just to read it, so I'm sorry about that. That's a better question for the forum, if I'm honest. AJB46385, hey Eric, 93 Jeep Grand Cherokee with 273,000 miles on it. Issue is regarding power steering. Sometimes after a 34-minute run on the highway, as I coast off the exit ramp, the power steering completely goes out. It will eventually come back, but you can make it come back quickly by raising the RPMs of the engine. Then it seems to be normal again. It's also somewhat difficult to steer while pulling into parking spots. I did replace the PS pump several years ago with a reman from one of the parts stores. Bearing had gone out. With this info, can we pinpoint if it's the pump issue or gearbox issue? Thanks, Anthony. You know, Anthony, in my experience, it rarely is the power steering pump. Everybody hopes for the power steering pump because that's the easy thing to replace, but it's almost always has something to do with the steering gear. And if I'm not mistaken, that uses the older style steering gear, not the rack and pinion type. Losing all power steering and then it coming back though. Now it's 93 and I wish I was more familiar with those, but I'm wondering if there is a pressure switch someplace in the high pressure power steering hose that tells the computer to give you power steering or not power steering. Because when you're driving down the highway, you don't want your power steering to work. You only want it working when you're going into a parking space. Other than that, like once you've got the vehicle moving, power steering just isn't necessary. In fact, many older vehicles, like I'm talking like 40s and 50s, they didn't have power steering. They had big steering wheels. The reason they had big steering wheels is so you could have mechanical leverage to steer them because they had no power steering. So later model vehicles, what they do is they computer control the pressure going through the power steering system to help with fuel economy. Now 93 seems kind of old, and it's also a Jeep Grand Cherokee, so I'm scratching my head to think whether or not it even has any kind of electronic components that have any kind of play whatsoever in the system, and I don't think it does. I really don't. So what I think, it's more likely, what I would do is I would go over your entire suspension, especially the steering stuff, and see if there's something that's loose or something that's maybe binding. Look for orange dust around like the ball joints and things where the different parts of the suspension connect. Anything that moves that has orange dust around it is suspect. And on that one, I'd be checking the U-joints also, because I have seen the U-joints cause problems, even if you're not engaged in four-wheel drive, but the U-joints on the front wheels, I have seen those, once they go bad enough, cause binding in the steering. Now, I'm not saying that that's exactly what's happening with yours, but it's a possibility. So a few things to check. I would go through and check your suspension first. And if you don't find anything with your suspension, get a look at that power steering box, or that steering box. I know it's not exactly easy to get to, but see if there's anything loose there. And if you don't see anything, you might be looking at replacing that power steering box to solve that problem. Delta V, do you carry spare tools in any of your vehicles? I always carry a basic tool set, jump leads, 1 quart of fluid for each of the, 1 quart of each fluid for the vehicle in the trunk, whether I'm driving 5 minutes down the street or a multi-hour journey. For those, I'd rather have it than not need it moments. I'll be honest, I carry minimal tools. Like, I actually carry more tools in my truck than anything, and I don't really drive it all that much. So the truck has the most tools in it. But I usually carry like an inflator, a flashlight, what else? Really, you know, like a blanket, more like an emergency kit, and then I carry all the fluids like you carry. But I don't really bring tools, and I think my days of fixing things along the side of the road are done. I usually don't find myself, in the days of cell phones, it's like, so I usually don't find myself there. And what my strategy is I try to maintain my vehicles. Like, I'm meticulous about maintenance. I have a lift for fun's sake. So I can come in here and basically tear apart a vehicle before I go on a multi-hour journey and make sure that everything's tip-top before I leave, so I don't have to worry about it. And that's normally what I do. That's normally been my strategy. My vehicles never go a long period of time without me giving them some kind of attention. It's just how I am. So that instead of carrying tools, I basically am hyper maintenance. So maybe that's my approach. But I try to keep a couple of things on hand, more for me than for the vehicle, because if one breaks down, then I've got something else I can drive. So I'm fortunate enough to have that. So that's what I do. But I do like to have some fluids on hand in case I need them. So I do carry around like a box full of stuff. And also, I gave up on jumper cables. I just keep jump boxes now. I used to keep jumper cables, but they're all unwieldy, and actually a bunch of companies wanted me to review their jump starters, so I have enough jump starters for every vehicle now, it seems. So there is that. Those things are pretty much ubiquitous these days. All right, SMH Labs, whatever that means. Love your videos. I'll keep this short. What are your opinions on new Tesla cars, not just their self-driving capabilities, but also about the lack of a dealership entity in their business strategy and the change in trend from internal combustion engines to battery-powered motors? Lastly, I like how you got that absolutely correct. An engine's an engine, a motor's electric. Lastly, how will it affect the automotive repair business? Thanks. P.S. The long hair looked good on you. Well, when it was actually there, when I started losing it, it didn't look so good. It kind of looked stupid, but yeah, for a time, I had pretty hair. Girls were envious. For a time. Not anymore. Now, sadly, I have more hair on my butt. Too much information, right? All right, so as far as my opinion on Tesla, I actually did a video about Tesla and that crash that happened at Sun ETCG1, Tesla, a tragic story, something like that. I'll do my best to put links in the description to all of this stuff after the show concludes. Yeah, Elon Musk. He certainly wants to change the world now, doesn't he? And he is, one electric car at a time, and tunnels under LA, and rides around the moon or whatever. Yes, it's not just electric vehicles, and the limiting factor with electric vehicles is the range, and it will be until they figure out battery technology, which may never happen. There's been a big push lately. I think General Motors and Honda just created a joint venture to try to move towards hydrogen and make hydrogen fuel cells. So it's anybody's guess where it's actually going, but it is a period of change. But I want you to consider this. Back at the turn of the last century, when automobiles first started out, there were 3 different types. There were steam-powered, there were electric-powered, and there was gasoline-powered. It was the discovery of oil in Texas that made the gasoline-powered internal combustion engine the most viable option because it was the cheapest to make. And I think that'll tell you what's going to happen in the future. What's going to happen in the future is it will go for the highest profit margin. So whether that's an electric, which maybe not, and honestly, the electric cars, as far as air pollution, Yeah, I mean, well, it depends on how you look at it, because it depends on how the electricity was made. If it was made from the Hoover Dam, no problem. That's nature. But if it was made in a coal-fired plant, then you're polluting the atmosphere by, filling up your Tesla with electricity. There's also the batteries and the toxic chemicals contained therein, and the manufacturing of those batteries and everything else. So electric is not as clean. I mean, if you looked at the whole big picture, it's not as clean as you think, and it depends on where you're getting the power from. So if you're getting it from burning coal, you're still using internal combustion to power your car. You're just doing it indirectly. So hydrogen is a viable option, but cost of materials, I think, is going to be high. Because I've talked to engineers about this, and they say that, excuse me, similar components, similar things that are found inside catalytic converters like platinum, palladium, and stuff like that are also, I believe, used in hydrogen fuel cells. And those metals are becoming more scarce, and if they start becoming, commonplace in the world, then they may cost even more. However, you weigh that against the environmental, all that kind of thing. No, I'm not sure. But in my opinion, I think it's going to be, like I said, whatever works economically, not only for the manufacturers, but also for the consumers. Because, have you priced Teslas? I know they're coming out with the new model that's supposed to be affordable for the everyday person, but Teslas are pretty high up in the tax bracket as far as the people can afford and drive them. So once again, I think it'll come down to what's affordable and what can be manufactured affordably. Moving on. Oh wow, we ate up some time with that one. Since we're down to the last 10 minutes, I'm going to get all random with it like I often do at this point. And I will try to answer questions from the people that posted most recently. Because, those people in the middle there, I guess it just depends on how much I run on, and I apologize for that. But I try to give everybody all the attention that I possibly can. So anyway, what do we got here? Eddie77, hello Eric. I recently did a transmission oil change on my 2008 Pontiac G8. It's an automatic transmission. After I was done, I took it for a test ride. Everything seemed good. It shifts smoother. I don't really have any complaints when the car is running, but right after I shut off the car, I can hear a grinding noise. Only for half a second, but it's audible. I think the noise is coming from where the engine and transmission meet. My car doesn't have a transmission dipstick, but I made sure to put back the same amount of fluid that I got out. The noise isn't audible at all when the engine is running or when the transmission engages. Any thoughts? Thank you. Yes, you are correct in that you do not have a dipstick, but there is a procedure for filling up that transmission that if it is not followed, I know you put out what you put back in, but if you don't follow this procedure, then it could cause an issue. Now, I'm not saying that this is responsible for the noise, but you want to make sure that you have the proper level in there. And I believe there's an inspection plug that you pull out of the side of the transmission that needs to be running. All four wheels need to be off the ground and the vehicle needs to be level. And then you fill it up till it comes running out that hole. So you could still be low on transmission fluid. I'm not saying that's what the noise is because I don't know, I didn't hear it. But it sounds like the noise happened after your transmission fluid change, and the most logical thing is it had something to do with something you did when you changed the transmission fluid. So go looking. That's what I would recommend anyway. Tim Dog, 35. Yes, get better with the names. Awesome. Hey Eric, 95, Ford Mustang GT. Whenever it's at idle, I hear some noise coming from under the hood. Whenever I'm driving, the noise is gone, but when I come to a stop, the noise returns. I checked all the pulleys and all were good. Any ideas on what the problem is because it's driving me nuts? Thanks, Eric. Well, without hearing the noise, let's see. Crystal ball's got nothing. Yeah, the noise is gone when you go driving. Maybe it's just being masked by other noise, like perhaps your tires on the road, something of that nature. I have done videos about finding noises. A stethoscope might be your friend, or a long screwdriver. I have used long screwdrivers to do this, but I think these days you can get stethoscopes at Harbor Freight really affordably. And you can use that to sort of listen around and see if you can pinpoint it. This is a really good tool for finding noises in my experience. So you might try that and see if you can catch it while it's in the act, and perhaps it's a bearing, perhaps it's really hard to say. Ooh, here's a Canadian. I was gonna keep going, but I like Canadians. Daha 3350. Greetings from Western Canada, Eric. No question this time, simply praises from Adair, Alberta. All right, Alberta. Well, thank you. Your work has helped me from the gutter more than once. I've already saved a good $200 Canadian in oil changes and seasonal tire rotations, with more savings to come in the future. And equally important, your forum recently confirmed a diagnosis I would receive regarding my 1997 Civic, which is helping confirm certain car-related decisions to come after this tax season. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your help, and to others. Without you or without there wouldn't be an ETCG forum or videos that have helped people at all, as well as all of you've done to date with all you're doing now. You're a living example of what comes when a person never gives up and the craft they choose. Can't wait to see the Fairmont project when it's finished. To borrow your catchphrase, be safe, have fun, stay dirty, take care. Dana Harpensad. Thank you very much for that. You know, there are days when I'm not feeling so fresh. And when I read comments like yours, it reminds me of why I do this. There's certain people out there that I know that I'm always helping, you know, despite some of the naysayers that pop up from time to time. So I really appreciate you making that comment. But now let's get to some of these questions, because that's what we're here for. But I do appreciate that. It's always nice to hear you're doing a good job. I don't care what you do. You know, if you're working at a convenience store counter, somebody says you're doing a good job, I mean, to some degree that means something. I know, because I've done it. Anyway, I'm getting random with it. Oh, I like these shorter ones. Thomas95, hello, I'm looking into a 99 F-150 that needs an engine and rear end for 500. Should I go for it? Hey, that's up to you, man. What you feel like doing. If you know what you're getting into and it's only $500 and you got the tools and the time to do it, hey, you know, go for it. Have fun. And stay dirty. Ella Rono, hey Eric, but watching your show, that's weird. For the last few years, since when I got my Subaru Outback, you were working on almost the exact same Subaru Legacy. I'm just wondering about transmission fluid changing. I got a 2011 Ford Fusion. I drained the fluid out about 4 ports and replace it with Valvoline Mercon LV compatible fluid. The performance hasn't been shifting satisfactory since. So what I'm wondering is if I can drain the fluid again, maybe crank the engine a few times to get more fluid out and refill it with the Mercon LV spec fluid. If that would be wise. Stay dirty, my friend. So in other words, you changed your transmission fluid and it's not quite shifting right, and you believe it has something to do with the transmission fluid used. It's quite possible. Let's see. It sounds like you used the correct stuff. You know, so it's difficult to say. But I have known some vehicles that don't get transmission fluid changes for a very long time, and then you change them. It can sometimes cause the transmission to act differently. So that may be what you're experiencing, and changing it again may not help. I would, instead of trying to crank the engine while you've got things disconnected, just change the fluid again and see if there's a difference. If there is, then you know you're on the right track. If there isn't, well, there could be other things going on with the transmission. Article on the FAQ page about such issues, and more detail about what I mentioned about the possibility that changing transmission fluid can sometimes cause an automatic transmission fluid to start acting up when it wasn't before. All right. Ooh, a couple more minutes. Cryptic. I don't know how to say that. It's 2 I's. 2000 Dodge Durango 5.2 two-wheel drive. On initial startup, the exhaust smokes like blown head gasket, but after it warms up, no smoke exists. Any thoughts? Cracked block, maybe? No. I say it's probably completely normal, especially for the winter. So exhaust smokes like a blown head gasket when you first start it up. Well, it's running rich. And water is a natural byproduct of combustion. In fact, my wife and I were going to lunch last week, and there was a pickup truck in front of us that pulled away, and water came out of the pipes in the back. She says, "Why does water come out of the exhaust?" I said, "Water's a natural byproduct of combustion. I mean, when you take the chemicals and put them through combustion, out the other side, H2O is one of the things that comes with all that other nasty stuff like NOx and carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide and hydrocarbons and all those other kinds of things that come out the other end. But yes, if it goes away when it warms up, it's completely normal. If it's there when it's warm, then you worry about head gaskets and such. But I've actually got, once again, on the overheat article, on this very website that you posted your question to, I go into, and I think I might even address that. I've got like tons of fuzz in my pocket. I don't know, just because it's cold in here. I got my hand in my pocket, and now I got fuzz in there. What is going on? All right. So no, I'd say that's completely normal. All right, let's do one more. One more. All right. All right, Nuke Dave. I picked you because I could read your name. Hey, Eric. Dreaded 2006 Ford F-150 5.4 liter question. Left rocker arm cover has a loud squealing coming from under there. Sounds like a bad belt or pulley. Makes some noise when with the serpentine belt off. Cam follower maybe. That engine does have a reputation for some stuff going on with the cam phasing and timing chain tensioners and all that. I can't remember all the specifics on it. And once again, when we're talking about a noise, it could be a lack of lubrication. It could be, excessively worn parts. It's without hearing noises, I can't say. And even when I do hear the noise, I have to poke around at it for a bit to find out what's going on. So noises are super difficult to address in this context just because I can't hear them and I can't put my hands on it, and I apologize for that. But I don't know anything off the top of my head that is related to that noise based on your description, and I apologize for that. But I'm hoping that maybe if you post that over to the forum, people will be able to help you identify what's going on with it, something of that nature. But for me, I am going to wrap this show up. So I want to, once again, thank you for watching. I hope I thanked you at the beginning. So if I didn't thank you at the beginning of this, thank you for watching, especially now. I mean, you've gone through this far. As I stated, if you're posting questions to the YouTube video, I can't see those, and I likely won't be answering those questions. However, EricTheCarGuy.com is always available to you 24/7, 365, unless it's down, which isn't often. I yell at my developer if the website goes down. Let's see, what else can I impart to you? Oh yeah, all the things that I discussed during the course of this video, give me a few minutes. I'm going to link those things down in the description, such as videos or things that I mentioned. I'll also link those FAQ articles that I talked about. Basically, I'll try to give you every advantage as far as giving you information that I hope will be helpful to you in solving your automotive issues. Additionally, I do these every 2 weeks, so the next show, today is the 1st, so I believe it will be March 15th. I will be doing this again Wednesday, 7 p.m. -5 GMT for the rest of the world, just so you can figure it out. So 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Outside of that, like I said, EricTheCarGuy.com. Anyway, Google+, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram if you wish to connect with me social-like, and I close each of my videos, including these live shows, which I will once again thank you for watching with Be Safe, have fun, stay dirty. I'll see you in a couple weeks. Take care. Maybe this thing will be running. That would be awesome, wouldn't it?